Okay, guys, so this is my first actually official video that I'm going to post um, about what's been going on since I guess it started back in October of last year, November of last year, but um, everything kind of accelerated in April of this year. Um, my husband had been sick for a while. He had trouble with his stomach, and his pyloric sphincter kept closing up, and they would go in and dilate it and he'd be okay for a little while. And they did CT scans and checked everything out, and there was nothing that they could really tell that was structurally wrong. So he kept going in and out of the hospital, and in April, the last part of April, he went into the hospital. He had actually mowed our grass um, that day, and he came in and he said, he said, I'm sick. I think I need to go back to the hospital. So I took him back to the emergency room. I called his doctor, took him back to the emergency room, and expected it to be the same thing. And they put an NG tube in and relieved some of the pressure, and they admitted him to the hospital. And the next day, they did another CT scan, and they saw something in his abdomen, um, and his gastroenterologist wanted to go and look a little further into it. And he did an upper GI and really couldn't see anything, so he decided to move him to a larger hospital in Louisville so that they could do a little more extensive surgery. They were going to do a biopsy, and it was just in such an odd place they couldn't get to it. And so they moved him to Louisville in the middle of the night, and the next morning they did um, a surgery. They actually did a biopsy, and it turned out that he had stage 4 adenocarcinoma, and they said that at this point he had gotten down. He was 192 pounds last summer, and he had gotten down to 127 pounds, 130 pounds at this point. And so they decided they were going to give him a G tube and an NG tube, or actually a G tube and a J tube. J tube so he could get some nutrition, and an NG tube so that they could drain his stomach because his stomach wouldn't drain anymore. And while they were in there placing the tubes, they did a biopsy. And he stayed in the hospital for about 3 days after that, and they sent him home. And they were going to try and let him gain some strength before they wanted to start chemotherapy, because they really, at this point, it was so extensive. There was no way they could be doing surgery, because it was actually um, entwined in his mesenteric artery and his pyloric axis. So I mean, it was just there was nothing they could do. And so they sent him home, and we were giving him tube feedings, and he stayed home um, 1 day shy of 2 weeks. And on Saturday, he actually um, he said that he couldn't breathe. There was something wrong. He didn't look like he was in distress, but he couldn't breathe. But he was scared. And so I called his doctor, and his doctor said call an ambulance. So they took him to the hospital, and it turns out that once they had opened him up and exposed the cancer, it grew exponentially, and it had actually perforated his bowel, and he was septic at that point. His potassium was 2, and his white cell count was like 26,000 or something. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so they ended up moving him again to Louisville, because we live about 25 miles from Louisville, and they moved him back to Louisville and put him in intensive care. He was having, you know, runs a VTAC because of his potassium levels. And so we took him to Louisville, and I went to my mom's house to pick up my kids. We have a 5 year old and a 6 year old. And I went to my mom's house to pick them up, and I was going to come home and sleep that night and take them to my sister the next morning. And I pulled into the driveway, and his surgeon called, and she informed me that there was nothing else that they could do for him. They could try to do some surgery to kind of give him a little more time, but she couldn't even assure me that he would live through that surgery, that he would survive that surgery. And she asked me at that point if I wanted to make him a do not resuscitate. And this is my life partner. This is the person I was, he was the one I was going to raise my children with. And I told them, told the doctor, I said, well, I don't want to make him suffer anymore. I mean, if there's nothing that can be done, there's nothing that can be done. But if you can just keep him alive until I can get back there in the morning, because I've got to take my children someplace to my family, if you can just keep him alive, I'll make some decisions when I get there. And so we got there, and or I got there, dropped my children off to church at, to my sister, and I went to the intensive care, and the nurse there, she was telling me what was going on and how he was doing, and the decision was made to just move him to palliative care at Baptist East, and so that afternoon they moved him. That was Sunday afternoon, and he lingered for 3 days. He ended up dying at 10:48 Wednesday night, in the palliative care unit there. And although it was like the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life, I was in the bed with him, and he was running a temperature of like 104 degrees. I mean, he was just, and he wasn't responsive at that point. And it got so hot that I had to get up out of the bed, and I pushed the recliner up next to his bed, and I laid my head down on a pillow, and I felt him die. A lot of people, are going to say, there's just no way. You're crazy. But I literally felt his spirit pass through my body when he died. It was just like the most, it was the strangest sensation that I've ever felt. But I was so grateful that I was able to be there with him. And since then, my life has just been chaos. Like I said, I've got a 5 year old and a 6 year old. And they don't understand. They wanted to see him. He wanted to be cremated. They wanted to see him before he was cremated. And, we went back and forth on whether or not they could, and ultimately decided that we would allow them to see them or see him. And I'm glad that I did. I just didn't want them having questions as they got older. But I've encountered a lot of things since he died that I really never took into account. Um, I never anticipated experiencing. And I'm actually going to use this channel to kind of share some of this stuff that I'm going through, and I'll go back and recount some of the things that have happened since he died, because it's been a roller coaster of emotion, and my kids are really kind of struggling a lot. My daughter especially, she was daddy's girl, um, and she has nightmares, um, and then she has dreams. So daddy comes to her and says, that he's always going to be with her and he loves her, and I don't know if that really is, the case or not, or maybe, her mind is manufacturing that because that's how she's coping and dealing with it. But this is basically what I wanted to share. And I'll have some more updates and I'll go back and recount some of the things that have happened. But I just want you guys to know that I have a very deep faith. I know where my husband is. I know that he's watching over us. Um, and I just want to share our journey with you. And I want to give other people hope, that if you find yourself in this situation, if you're widowed or widower, a widower at, with young kids, there's a way to get through it. There's a way to keep moving. And I'm not gonna lie, I was paralyzed with grief for the first 2 months. I mean, literally paralyzed. I don't know how my children survived me. Um, but anyway, that's where I'm gonna leave it for tonight. But I really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you guys have a blessed night.